Defining feminism. After U.S. conservatives complain about double standards, we ask whether the movement to empower women has become too exclusive. Also on the program, Colombia's ELN bombs Bogota. We ask the Colombian Ambassador if the peace process with the rebels has been shattered. And in Picture This, dramatic scenes in the occupied West Bank as Israeli police evict illegal settlers from Palestinian land. I'm Imran Garda, and this is the Newsmakers. It is a badge of honor for some and a divisive concept to others. But one thing's for sure, it's a loaded term, feminism. So when one of the most powerful women in the White House implied she was a conservative feminist at America's biggest Republican convention, it reignited controversy. Kellyanne Conway said she didn't identify with classic feminism, lambasting it as, in her words, very pro-abortion. Her comments were made just over a month after the largest demonstrations in U.S. history, known as the Women's March. But while that march brought together hundreds of thousands of women, it was also criticized by some who felt excluded due to the organizers' overtly pro-abortion stance. And now more conservative women are pledging to wrestle back a label they feel liberals have hijacked. Mainstream feminists, for their part, say reproductive rights and women's rights go hand in hand. So which is it? Our newsmaker today is feminism, as we ask who lays claim to the cause.
They united to oppose the newly elected U.S. president, to march for women's rights, and for much more.
This is what democracy looks like! Black Lives Matter!
But what was touted as an inclusive march where love trumped hate sounded like a pro-choice platform that excluded pro-life women.
Reproductive rights are human rights.
There are very real and devastating consequences to limiting access to what should be considered basic health care.
The women who disagree say the liberals have hijacked the feminist cause.
They also purposely ignore and dismiss any woman who doesn't think like they do, like Kellyanne Conway, Sarah Palin, Ivanka Trump, or really any woman who doesn't hold free abortion or birth control as priority one for the nation.
Feminism is defined as the advocacy of women's rights on the ground of the equality of the sexes. But over the decades, the movement has evolved. The first wave of feminism in the early 1900s focused on women's right to vote. In the 1960s, women like Gloria Steinem fought for rights in the workplace and sexual freedom. But nowadays, the debate has broadened. Some women of different backgrounds argue that mainstream feminism has become elitist and too white-centric. And then there's conservative women. They say they're being left out, especially those who identify as pro-life feminists. U.S. President Donald Trump's top advisor, Kellyanne Conway, is championing a new label as a conservative feminist.
It's difficult for me to call myself a feminist in the classic sense because it seems to be very anti-male, and it certainly is very pro-abortion. Mercedes, I look at myself as a product of my choices, not a victim of my circumstances. And that's really, to me, what conservative feminism, if you will, is all about.
But is the feud over labels, new feminism, classic feminism, black feminism, ecofeminism, helping representation, or do divisions dilute the cause? Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Micah Hazel from London. She's a blogger at The Huffington Post and an editor at Vocal Lady magazine, an online publication dedicated to promoting feminism. And from Dallas, Texas, Destiny Herndon-De La Rosa. She's the founder and president of an anti-abortion group called New Wave Feminists. Thanks, both of you, for joining us. Looking forward to the conversation. Micah, let's start with you. Kellyanne Conway says she's a feminist, so is she?
I think she is a feminist, but unfortunately there are some things within her opinion that we definitely need to discuss.
Like what?
Well, her feminism is apparently drawing off the idea that the feminism that is popular right now is anti-male. And I think that is a huge misunderstanding, and that's something that definitely needs to be, definitely was misinterpreted, because feminism isn't anti-male. In fact, we really just want to cooperate with men and get equal pay, equal respect, and equal rights.
Mm-hmm. Destiny, do you accept that for many classical feminists, for them it's almost like a doctrinal issue? For them, being a feminist and being pro-choice or pro-abortion is almost like being Catholic and being pro the Trinity. It's just a part of a kind of belief system. Do you accept that from classical feminists?
I mean, obviously not. Now, the original feminists were pro-life, so we're seeing this more in the third wave, that abortion is becoming synonymous with feminism. But, you know, I think it takes a whole lot of different perspectives, and we need more dialogue on this issue, certainly not less. That's where my group enters. We want to talk about how do we support women in crisis pregnancies, because the one thing I think both sides can agree on is at the end of the day, nobody wants an abortion. This is not something that, you know, little girls dream of growing up and getting to have one. It's almost always a decision made out of fear and panic. And so the more we can come together and say, how do we empower women so they don't have to make this violent choice? In my opinion, that's a wonderful common ground that we can find with pro-choice feminists.
Mm-hmm. Destiny, you were a part of the Women's March initially, officially, right? So you talk about empowering women, the New Wave feminists. Now, I read that your group were official partners, you were included, and then you were excluded. Tell me why.
You know, we made it very clear that we were anti-abortion, but we also laid out all the other things that we agreed with the march organizers on. We're very concerned about the Trump administration and the misogyny in Donald Trump's past. And so we felt like we would be a great voice to be added to this mix. Now, when it came out in an Atlantic article more publicly that we were pro-life, there was a lot of backlash against the march organizers. And unfortunately, they kind of caved to that pressure and removed us. But we still marched. I mean, the only thing that changed is our name was no longer listed as a partner on the website.
Micah, would you accept that someone like Destiny, talking from Dallas, she's a partner in the same struggle? The only thing that she probably disagrees with you on is that she's anti-abortion, pro-life as she would call it, and you're not. Can you still be allies as feminists?
Yes, I think it's very important that, I mean, I personally do not agree with being pro-life. I do think it is very crucial to the feminist movement that we are pro-choice, just so women can have the right to what to do with their bodies. It's not necessarily to tell women to get abortions or to make abortions seem like something better than what it is. And I definitely agree that it's terrible. But I would say that if you are pro-life, you can be a feminist because there are several levels to feminism. However, I do think it's something that very much needs to be disputed, and that we do need to get on a pro-choice platform.
Destiny, I want to ask you about Sarah Silverman, the comedian, and a tweet of hers very recently where she said, as a comic always working and on the road, I have had to decide between motherhood and living my fullest life, and I chose the latter. When you hear something like that from Sarah Silverman, she's a self-professed, self-described feminist. How do you feel?
I mean, I think that's an incredibly negative message that, again, it's telling me that women can't. We can't be mothers. We can't still live our life to the fullest. To me, that's a load of crap. So I actually do not like the fact that abortion rights oftentimes pit us against our own biology and against our own children. You know, if we look at the root of feminism, it is basically us saying we are not property. We were treated as property for far too long, and now we have passed that same label down to the unborn person who's our own child and said, you are property and we should be able to treat you however we see fit because might makes right. I'm bigger and stronger and you're weak and vulnerable. So when Sarah Silverman says things like that, that kind of reiterate this fact that women can't, that to me is not feminism.
Micah, do you need more people to make the tent bigger and have less of this kind of, hey, you're either with me and my lifestyle or you're out?
Well, I think that whole you're with my lifestyle, you're out, is the reason why, unfortunately, we do have conservative feminism. Because there are statements like what Sarah Silverman said that don't necessarily apply to all women. I think all Sarah was really saying was, in her life personally, she had to make that choice to choose between being a mother and pursuing a lifestyle, which sometimes doesn't go together. And it's not that feminists are saying that, women shouldn't be able to handle children, or that, our children are just property that we're just going to give up. It's basically saying that if you come to a point where you have to do that, it's okay and it's understandable and we understand why. Not saying that, oh, well, you're bound to this child, you're bound to this life, you need to do both things, you need to do both things well. That's not what we're saying.
Micah, looking within the feminist debate as we're doing here, and there's always class elements, there's also racial elements, and I noticed from a lot of women of color, they criticize the Lena Dunhams of the world, the Amy Schumers, for an exclusively white feminism. Tell me what that means and what's the problem there?
Right. Well, obviously, whenever you have a movement, there are always, movements require action, and actions are always different. So you'll have the feminists like Emma Watson and Michelle Obama who are, promoting things like, I guess, education and promoting women in sports and women in jobs, just more, for lack of a better term, serious educational things. And then you have the feminists like Lena Dunham who are more sexually focused, who are more entertainment focused, satire, those kind of things that not all women, I suppose, can relate to. And sometimes, especially in the press, it can feel like one is getting an upper hand over the other. And in that case, the Lena Dunhams of the world sometimes get the upper hand in the press, and sometimes they're the ones that are being represented more as feminists, and they're the ones that get the spotlight, and it's a white woman. So people feel like, well, I'm not a white woman. I'm not, living in Brooklyn and living a great life. I'm not rich in any way, so I can't relate. And that's where you have people feeling like this is just white feminism. This is just this white middle class, upper class woman that I can't relate to. So that's why now we talk more about intersectional feminism, which even though a lot of people think that it's kind of branching off and splitting up feminism into different things, intersectional feminism is basically feminism itself. It's just a new term that's been used to make it clearer.
Okay, Destiny, are you looking forward to having a conversation with intersectional feminists as a conservative feminist?
Absolutely. Again, I think the more voices, the more experiences, the more background, as we talk about, white feminism is a real issue because my experiences are going to be different than women of color. And so the more voices we can have at the table, the more women saying, this is my personal experience, this is what I've been up against, the stronger our movement will be.
Okay, it was great talking to both of you, Destiny Herndon-De La Rosa and Micah Hazel. Thank you very much for joining us. Colombia's president and Nobel Peace Prize winner Juan Manuel Santos was praised for ending decades of conflict with the FARC rebel group. It was hoped that success would be repeated with the country's second largest rebel group, the ELN. But that now seems in doubt. They've claimed responsibility for last week's deadly blast in the capital, Bogota. They said it was their duty to attack a police unit they say was repressing free speech. So, has their commitment to their cause jeopardized an already fragile peace process? Yvette McCullough has the story.
A deadly and provocative scene, just as attempts were being made to end decades of war. An explosion targeted riot police outside Bogota's famous bullring earlier this month. One officer was killed and more than 20 injured. The National Liberation Army, or ELN, now says one of its urban commandos carried out the attack to pressure the Colombian government to declare a ceasefire. The attack happened less than 2 weeks after the ELN and Colombian government met in Ecuador in hopes of hammering out a deal to end their more than 50-year-long conflict.
El gobierno de Juan Manuel Santos nos invitó a dialogar para buscarle fin al conflicto armado y aquí acudimos dispuestos a lograr una salida política.
But on Sunday, the ELN said it attacked because it's not coherent for the government to sit down at the table and talk peace while it delays a bilateral ceasefire. The ELN is the last active group in Colombia's decades-long guerrilla conflict that has killed more than 220,000 people. What impact will this attack have on an already controversial bid to broker peace? September last year, the Colombian government reached an historic peace deal with FARC rebels. It put the deal to the Colombian people in a referendum, and they rejected it by 50.2%. The deal was seen by many as too lenient and is letting the FARC get away with murder. In November, a new deal was signed, but that time, Colombians didn't get a say. Now, as the government begins peace negotiations with the ELN, the concerns are the same.
Dejan muchas dudas porque es un movimiento que vive de secuestrar personas inocentes.
A la guerrilla siempre le dan los beneficios que ellos exigen, mientras aquí hay personas honestas y trabajadoras que se lo merecen más que ellos.
And in light of this attack, the pressure from the opposition to end the talks is mounting. Former President Alvaro Uribe tweeted that keeping up talks with the ELN without considering their criminal actions is an offence to civilians and defies our constitutional right to security. What is the way forward for Colombia's long path to peace? Should the government abandon negotiations? Or will the cost of doing so be too high? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, I'm joined now from Ankara by the Colombian Ambassador to Turkey, Mr. Juan Alfredo Pinto. Sir, thank you very much for joining us. Why is it that your government can strike a peace deal with the FARC, but not this group, the ELN?
Oh, the peace agreement with the FARC is the biggest achievement in the peace-building process of Colombia during the last 20 or 30 years. FARC is the guerrillas group that most significant, not only in military sense, also in the space that they have taken in the territory of Colombia and in numbers and the military capacity. So they now are incorporated totally in the peace process. Now we have near about 7,000 former guerrillas concentrated in 21 compounds in different areas of the country. And now we are starting the process of disarmament and the reconstruction of the nation and the commitments about the peace agreement. The second group that is the significance is almost marginal. It's about 1,500, 2,000 members of the ELN guerrillas that we have started the negotiation with them on 7th of February with the mutual pretension to finish an agreement very soon and to try to complete in this way the 100% peace process in the total territory with the all political rebels forces in our country. Now we are going to complete the first month of negotiations. We have the natural difficulties in the beginning and the formal beginner of the process in this case.
Yes, so you say they're insignificant in comparison to FARC. Obviously, they're not insignificant to the people who were injured in Bogota. Of course, 26 police and civilians injured. One policeman was actually killed. So they're not insignificant to the family of that policeman, right? Are you worried that the ELN, as it lashes out in the absence of peace, is going to derail not only your negotiations with them, but also the negotiations with the FARC and the general peace process, because the Colombian people will start to stop supporting your government?
No, of course, we are worried, and the government of Colombia will be officially pronounced. Our chief negotiator, that is in this case the former minister Juan Camilo Restrepo, has spoken very clearly in the sense that in the beginning of the negotiations, sometimes the parts try to present the face of the each one is very strong. And this is the explanation of this blast near about the bullfighting place of Bogota, with a terrible consequence, as you are mentioned, to the family and one member of our police that passed away in that incident. But the expressions are very clear. If the ELN pretends with these actions, temerary and daring actions, if they pretend to accelerate one ceasefire or looking at the conditions that probably coming during the process of negotiation, they are very wrong, because if creating violence, you cannot promote the conditions of the peace negotiation. If you are taking the violence and another instrument within the process of negotiation, the government cannot react in positive manner. That's the case just in the beginning of the negotiation. One of the discussions, very strong, was the kidnapping of one former member of the Parliament of Colombia, and the government sustained the position: we are not going to start the negotiations if you don't release this very important leader in the Pacific coast of Colombia. Finally, he was released, he was liberated, and the conversations start in Quito, thanks to the support of the government of Ecuador and some countries, friends of the process. Now we are in a juncture that the ELN are asking for the ceasefire through some army terrorist attacks. And of course, the government needs to express clearly to Colombian people and to the international public opinion that we are not going to move into the accelerating negotiation through force or terrorist activities or actions. They are not going to find that purpose, and they have to understand that it's totally the opposite. If they definitely stop the terrorist actions, the negotiations will be running in a good speed. If we are afraid, talking about the support of the people or the political forces to the government, definitely no. Definitely the most of the people in Colombia now are not only supporting the peace negotiations, only wishing the peace. The people refuse these kind of activities, and is the ELN, if they have a little support in some regions, they are going to lose it if not reaction in the right manner. I hope that in short term, they definitely cease these kind of actions, and the speed and the process of the negotiation could be more quickly and talking the points. There are 5 big points that they are put in agree with the government on the table. Points like how can we move to the most deep democracy? How can we move in the participation, increasing the participation of the social sectors into the social life of the country? How can we move to managing the victims and other points, strategical points of the negotiation? And we have now the base. The 6 years was the period of duration of the negotiation to the FARC. For it's impossible to discuss that the base of the new negotiation with the ELN is crossed by the agreement that we have signed, and it is in practical implementations with the FARC.
Ambassador Juan Alfredo Pinto, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. Good to get your government's perspective on this very important issue. Thank you very much for joining us. In today's Picture This, hundreds of Israeli police officers have moved in to evacuate homes slated for demolition in the occupied West Bank settlement of Ofra. Let's take a look. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.